Good evening from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in the Gail Lemron Auditorium right here on campus. On behalf of President John P. Johnson, I'm Marc Bernier, moderator for tonight's President Speaker Series event. In the final event of the calendar year 2014, we bring a genuine American hero with us. I read the book. Ladies and gentlemen, for the next hour plus, you'll hear the stories of a man who helped to train the Iraqi Air Force and the lessons learned, and you may walk out of tonight's event with a different impression of the Iraqi people. Ladies and gentlemen, my great pleasure to present the author of A Flowershop in Baghdad, Major Marc Banzet.
Thank you.
Mike, thanks for coming. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Mike.
When I first heard the story and saw the book, there was a story about it in Lift magazine here at Embry-Riddle. I thought, it's an unusual title for a fighting man. And then I read it, and it is perfect. You have to read this. Go all the way to the end because it makes perfect sense. 22 years serving your country.
Roger that.
And then retire. You come out in what, 2008?
2009.
2008,
yeah.
2009. And during that time, you were in several theaters of the war here. And you write this story to basically tell the American people it's not what you saw in the newspapers and on television, correct?
It's not what I saw. That's for sure. I'm sure there was coverage on all aspects of it, but it sure seemed to me that we concentrated on the negative a lot more than the positive. Obviously, in any armed conflict, you're going to have good things and bad things happen. But it doesn't count if you just talk about the bad things. It's not the full picture. And that's what I saw over there. And they missed a lot of the subtleties of all the positive stuff that was happening kind of beneath the scenes. And it's a long process, but it seems like they had an agenda, that's all.
You take people through basic training. And you educate us a little bit about how rough it is. I always knew that it was not for the weak to go through basic training.
Well, I made it, so it's that hard.
I know it's a minuscule story, but you got to tell it. There was an episode during basic training with Easter.
More specific than that.
With Easter, it involved Easter candy. How did that stuff make its way into the training camp, and then everybody got sick?
Oh no, that was at Khamis Mashait in Saudi Arabia during Desert Storm 1, and yeah, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the way the logistics system works in theater. They usually have Hercs run around the theater, and you offload all the gear. And loadmasters are pretty good at knowing what's on and off their airplane. And we thought it was a major coup when we felt that we were at kind of the end of the logistics trail, so we didn't get any of the cool stuff. We got all of our parts, but none of the swag. And we liberated a pallet of candy. And I should have known better, but we were all really excited about it. So we looked like it looked like a nature show, a bunch of hyenas around a dead gazelle or something. And I grabbed a bunch of M&Ms and whatever the heck else was there, and we were just pounding them down. And as I opened them, I said, "Wow, these things come in combat colors or desert colors," and they don't, by the way. So we were sleeping in the hazes, which were bomb-proof, and they were actually the aircraft hangars, and we would sleep. So it was pitch dark. There was no natural light at all. The walls were about 12 inches thick or whatever they were. I was reading a book, Starship Troopers, and all of a sudden I got some gurgling and whatnot going on. And you're sleeping there with 50 of your best buddies who all are trying to sleep or whatever, and the bathroom was through big doors, and we ended up well, I can't talk about that on TV, but anyway, it turned out pretty badly, so I had to get up and run to the bathroom as fast as I could. But I went in there, and it sounded like, I think I called it a garbage truck hitting a tuba marching band or something like that. Everybody was just in there. It was worse than that. And it dawned on me that as everybody's in there, pants down around the ankles and all that kind of stuff, doing what you do, it dawned on me that M&Ms don't come in combat colors, and Snickers aren't supposed to be green. What had happened is this pallet had been in the logistics system for probably a decade or something, and they were trying to get rid of it. And the loadmaster just kind of turned his head and let us jump on this thing and think we got away with something. And the point of the story was, I'm not very bright, but the other point of the story was that in spite of all that stuff, most of us, it's hard to marshal an airplane. I was a staff sergeant at that time, crew chief. You can't marshal an airplane with your pants down around your, well, maybe you can, but they frown on that on the flight line. But the job got done. Every mission went because people filled in for when I couldn't be there in 10-minute spurts, or spurts is the wrong word. So people would fill in, the mission just got done. People picked up, rolled up their sleeves, it didn't matter what you were, every single jet rolled on time. And the pilots were smarter than I was because they didn't partake in our bounty. But yeah, that was a Kamis Vashait.
On the lighter moments, you know, and there's some real serious, poignant moments in this book. And just before we went on, I asked you about married with kids. You wrote letters to your children, and you had your wife put them in a drawer before you went, because in case you didn't come back, you wanted them to know how you felt about them.
Yeah, that's, and yeah, I think you asked if everybody does it. I don't know. That's a very personal thing. I imagine a lot of people who went into a combat situation probably did something like that. I didn't tell my wife. It would have been really hard to have her part of that process. So I waited till everybody went to bed, and then that's a tough deal. I mean, it really makes you assess where you're at, what your family means to you, what you're leaving. It was tough. That was one of the toughest things I've done.
And when you came home, you collected those letters?
Nope, the kids have them.
The kids have the letters?
We haven't really talked about it. It's for them.
Wow.
So
well, I've heard of parents doing that, but not under combat situations. They write a letter to the future. Sometimes grandparents do it. So you had a wonderful idea there.
I don't think it was unique. I imagine, you know, if you were told you're going to go into some sort of situation like that, you'd really want to make sure that the people that you care about know how you felt about them.
All right. To get to the hallmark of this, was your impression of the Iraqi people and what you were about to get into greatly different from the way you came out of that experience?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm
going in, what were you thinking?
Probably the same thing that a lot of people think. Cowards. I think that's probably the best term for what I would think of them. They didn't have much of they weren't professional. You know, we have a very professional military. I didn't think much of their capabilities. And it wasn't that they certainly weren't cowards. I was totally wrong on that. But it was, the proof, Mark, is that I wrote this book, 341 pages, and it's a little more now, and I'm not a writer. But when I came back, I was like, people have to know. I have to tell somebody. Well, I tell everybody I meet, but there's only one of me and there's a lot of you. So I had to put in there that what I discovered about societies, really, and how we were changing them up until we left.
One of the things that strikes me in this book is the corruption level. And I've talked with other people who served with you, and they said, oh, Afghanistan and Iraq, there is unlimited amount of corruption because these people had nothing. So sometimes when officers assume a position of power, they don't always do it right.
Well, that's not unique to that culture, is it? I mean, There's corruption everywhere. But it's a survival mechanism. It really is. When you don't have, I think at the end of the day, we live in a very high trust society. I came up with a couple of things that I thought were wise. I don't know if they were or not, but I think you can measure the success of a society by if you feel comfortable dialing 911. Because if you think about what that does, when you dial that number, somebody you don't know is going to show up at your place in a moment where you're extremely vulnerable. And I would do it without even batting an eye. I'll dial 911 all day long, and I fully expect whoever comes and is going to help me is not going to hurt me. They're not going to try and extort me. They're not going to whatever. They started to do that. The Iraqis started to do the equivalent of that as I was getting ready to leave. I mean, they would be calling in, hey, there's people digging a hole for an IED. They would be calling the friendly side, the Americans, and saying there's bad stuff going on in the neighborhood. And if you think about all that has to happen before they're comfortable doing that, you've got to be sure, if you're the Joe civilian out there, that the force for good is going to be around for a while. Because you can't cast your lot with us if you expect us to leave. And that's where the Afghans are kind of in that position now. How much would you align yourself with us, knowing that we're going to leave, and then the bad guys are still going to be there? They don't go away, as you saw when ISIS ramped up.
And we're going to talk a little bit about ISIS, and we'll take your questions from the audience. In writing this book, there are good people, there are bad people, even our own commanders. You go through a series of people who come in for briefings, and you describe very succinctly how they come into a room. Sometimes they're large, sometimes they're small, sometimes their egos are much bigger than they are.
Exactly.
How do you keep your dignity with that? I mean...
Oh, I think if you've read the book, you realize I really don't have much in the way of dignity left after, you know, after... Sense of humor certainly helps. Some of the biggest giggles I got were being shot at and mortared and stuff, and not being hit is, somebody said, Winston Churchill maybe, being shot at and missed is exhilarating. And it is. There were some really tough times to get through, but overall, most of the people, most Americans are pretty darn awesome. They just are. Those guys are the exceptions. You know, I called out a couple of big dorks, but even at their dorkiest, they're pretty harmless.
In previous sessions we had here, some military people told us that we had to steal parts from one plane to another. I think I saw that a couple of times in this. Is that normal? Is that the way it's supposed to be?
Well, no. In a perfect world, it's not the way it's supposed to be. But cannibalization is a part of every flight line that I've ever been on. It's not the best option, but if you have a part that's used a lot and you don't have a lot of them in supply, if your jet needs to fly and mine doesn't, you know, I can make your jet fly if I take this part off. It's not, they want to minimize it for sure, because if you think about the risk that you take from a maintenance perspective, you pull this one off, you could break it, put it on there, you could break it, now you've got a hole in this one. I think every flight line has a hangar queen, what they call a hangar queen, that has a very few parts left on it, but I think they have to fly like every 90 days or whatever. But it's getting the mission done. The logistics, especially at the end of the logistics tail, can get pretty sporty sometimes. But they probably do it in commercial aviation and stuff too. I don't know, but it wasn't abnormal. It certainly isn't the school solution, but I'll bet you they might even teach that at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical.
Mike, how long do they give you as a window to retrain the Iraqi Air Force?
Well, there wasn't. I mean, we had milestones that we were trying to get to, but again, I try to describe that. What's on a PowerPoint slide sometimes is different than what's in reality. And we would say, well, we're going to get to here. We knew that we had things that we were trying to influence them to achieve, but again, under their system, which was very, very different than ours. It was built on layer upon layer upon layer of bureaucracy, and I came to realize, for me, it was this lack of trust. The best thing that they ever could have in Saddam's regime, you wanted to be in charge, you wanted to be the big man, but you wanted to be responsible for nothing. And some of those conversations were, you know, hey, you're in charge of all of Iraqi Air Force training, right? So don't you think that these cadets misbehaving is your responsibility? Oh, no, no. Well, whose is it? Well, I'm pretty sure it's somebody else's. And again, that's a survival instinct, because in the old way of doing things, if you were responsible for something that went wrong, it wasn't a bad mark on your performance report, you just got a 7.62 enema. And that happened all the time. The part about the Flintstone Village, what we call the Flintstone Village, there was parts of Camp Victory that were these beautiful palaces, and there were houseboats and stuff, which we sunk. I don't know if it was on purpose or just got good at it, but there were, I mean, these palaces, and they had swimming pools built into these canals, and it was just this gorgeous place. But the guys that I was working with, they didn't know where anything was. I think I called it, I was like a tour guide in your house. They would say, Mike, I don't know where any of this stuff is. I'd say, hey, take me to this place. We weren't allowed to look at this place. You know, one of the, Wahid, and you'll have to forgive me if I stumble over the names, because I did change all the names, and it turned out to be a pretty smart move on my part. Assad, one of the guys in there, I had contact with him, I don't know, probably 3 months ago. He was kind enough to email me back, and that's pretty dangerous for him. But he said, and he was, you know, you'll have to meet him in the book. He's just the sweetest, smart. Oh, what a guy. Got a couple of kids, and he told me, he said, well, we're safe because I moved Muhammad up to Erbil, and we'll take care of this. He was very optimistic. He's a good guy. And he said, we'll take care of this ISIL stuff in a couple of weeks. And then, of course, ISIL attacked Erbil, and I haven't heard from him since. And I don't really want to email him anymore, because that could put him at risk too. But the stuff is still going on over there, and it's a good thing I did change their names.
Some of the waste blew me away, things I wasn't expecting to read in this book. For example, one of the people told you that with all of these palaces that Saddam Hussein had built, they would serve meals in all these places because they didn't want anybody to know where he was. So Saddam might be up here, and all the rest of the palaces were still preparing meals like he was there. So the staff just ate him, right?
Or not. I mean, you know, they probably poisoned him.
Yeah, he had a food taster.
Yeah, no kidding. And some of it is probably some exaggeration, I don't know. But I wasn't there. The part you're referring to is Wahid was talking about the effect of sanctions. And it was hurting, the point he was trying to make was, it's not hurting Saddam, it's hurting us. And some bad stuff had happened to him because they were taking medicine off the shelves, and you know they were obviously protecting the regime as opposed to, and he was more than happy to let the people suffer. You know, it shouldn't have been a surprise. The people he'd been oppressing, he was okay with oppressing some more.
Such a dangerous country. People are training, they're earning money, and they have to get it home to their families. And this is the story that blows me away. When they leave, they might get killed. The Iraqi people might get killed trying to get to their families, or the bad guys may be waiting at their homes, waiting for them to come home with money, so they might get robbed.
Oh, robbing would be the least of it. No, it was.
They would kill him.
The guy that I was talking about there, that did happen, and they got his family first, and then decapitated him last. And he was one of our bright and shinies. It makes sense to you if you're a bad guy, you want to get the people who are most a threat to you, and of course the people that are most a threat to the bad guys are the ones that had been working with us. I think there was kind of an agreement between the two sides. We won't hurt you if you just work for the Americans. Everybody understands that you got to make a living, right? But if you're part of this reconstruction effort, or if you're part of the Air Force or the military, and you see it happening now, then you get targeted. And you know, thank God Embry-Riddle is here, because I wouldn't have a degree if it wasn't for that. This is the first time I've actually set foot on an Embry-Riddle campus, and I have a master's degree from this place. And God bless them, they are everywhere. The only complaint I have is that they gave me a C for class participation while I was flying missions over Afghanistan. I thought that was a pretty good excuse. They did not. I missed a couple of online things, and like, all right, whatever. So there you go, whoever you are, shame on you. But, I mean, the fact that Embry-Riddle is everywhere. But I never had to contend with what these guys had to. These kids, and I'm not being deprecating, you know, I'm trying not to be, I don't want to denigrate them in any way, but when you're as old as I am, I guess most people are kids now. 22, 23 years old, and not only, they had made a decision, the Iraqis had made a decision, the Iraqi Air Force had made decisions that all their officers would speak English. And if you've ever tried to learn a language, I bet you didn't have to do it with, you know, we had Rosetta Stone software and they had headphones, but they couldn't put the headphones on both ears because they had to listen for incoming rounds. And they had to, when they would leave the base, because they couldn't stay on base permanently, right? And they would get paid their flus, dollars, and they get paid in cash, because they had an all cash society. There was no electronic anything, no checks, no nothing. And they had to figure out a way to sneak out, be just one of the workers, and then most of them would go to either take taxis to a different bus stop and take that bus stop to another bus stop, and then and try and get home that way. We didn't lose any while I was there. We lost a couple before I was there. But the guys that were the older folks, the generals and the colonels and stuff, they were being actively hunted by the Iranians. The Iranians had put a bounty on them because they were still mad about that whole Iran-Iraq war. And so they said, if you get a pilot, you get extra money or whatever it is. So that Wahid, that's why Assad was so angry with him most of the time.
There is a delicate balance, Mike, that you write about where you've got to train them, but you can't take over, you can't lead them. They've got to be able to lead themselves. So you're sort of like leading them, but then you have to back away, like a parent teaching a child to ride a bicycle.
Absolutely. And it's not, and it's, again, we're not denigrating them as a society, but it's really hard to explain to you guys what it was like growing up in that society. And it was, I was lucky enough that there was these four guys that were kind of the main guys I worked with all the time. I called them the four amigos. And Wahid and Assad were buddies since they were, this big. And that's about the only way you could trust each other. I mean, if you say the wrong thing and I can have the government come and feed you to a paper shredder, that generates a lot of distrust. And if you think about the ripple effects that has, if I can't trust you and you can't trust me, especially in a military situation, then that's where you get a lot of that kind of I'll leave you at the gate sort of thing, and what was happening in ISIL or ISIS now. So that to me was the biggest discovery I had. It's what makes a society tick, and once you see that this seems like the root cause, it kind of explained everything else to me. It explained how come they weren't very effective in combat. They weren't very effective even now. They couldn't trust each other. That's a platoon or a squad or a flight is built on trust. It's not just a guy, it's not the biggest guns. It's not the sexiest airplanes. It's none of that stuff. It's you and I trust each other. I'm gonna go out. You're gonna cover me? Yeah, all right, I'll go.
Did you, when you were leaving, ever dream that something that would become known as ISIS would just pop up?
I was worried about it, but ISIS could be anything, right? It's just a terrorist organization. The fact that they're calling themselves whatever they're calling themselves today. In the absence of good, evil flourishes, right? The thing of the raison d'etre, that's French. See, look at that, Embry-Riddle. The reason terrorism works is because I don't have to kill everybody. I just have to kill a couple people, make an example of them, and I have to get 90% of you to sit still and not do anything. I'll tackle the other 3 or 4% that are actively going to fight me, and then the rest of you I can recruit. That's how it works, right? And you don't have to control large swaths of land. You just have to intimidate people. One of the things that prompted me to write that afterward was, and it's just as simple as this. I talk about the massacre at Camp Spiker, right? And for those of you who don't know, Camp Spiker is up by Kirkuk, and that was a place that we actually scouted as a place to do their pilot training. I'm sorry, it's by Tikrit. We were actually training him at Kirkuk. And I don't know if you saw this story. It was a terrible story. And ISIS was very proud of the fact that they paraded all these kids into the desert, and they killed about 770 kids. 770, think about that. That's like my entire high school graduating class. And of course I was heartbroken because in there it said that about 175 of them were Iraqi Air Force cadets. That was some of the programs that we'd helped set up. And there was 2 eyewitnesses. Two guys got away, at least 2. And what they said was that their commanders, one of them had said, everybody take off your uniforms, put your guns down, get in the trucks, and we're going to send you to Baghdad. And of course the next group they found was ISIS. And the other guy said, our commanders just left. They just took off and left us with nothing. Now, if there had been, I was telling Kyle this, if there had been an American standing there, that wouldn't have happened. I could dress up Kyle in a Navy suit and put a flag on his shirt, and it wouldn't have happened. Because they used us for portable backbones. Everything, the guys that were in charge, and are in charge today, would use us as, like I said, portable spines. It was kind of funny, but it was also heartbreaking to watch. Because they would say, we're going to do this, and they'd kind of look out the side of their eye and say, to look at your facial expression. If you're making that face, they'd be like, well, I didn't mean that. I meant something completely different. And then until you were like, yeah, that's what we want to do, then they'd do that. 770 kids, if you put an AK in each one of their hands and told them to point east, and as soon as you see those guys start shooting until your gun gets quiet, do you think ISIS would have taken that place? 770 kids with AKs, all they had to do was fight back. But they sold them out. And that would not have happened had there been 3 or 4 Americans. I just know it. I saw the change of behavior. One of the ways I try to explain it to people is, I don't know how many of you have kids, but I noticed that there were standards of behavior were different, whether I was in the room, in the house, or just in town. The adherence to the rules of the Banzet household were a little different if I was sitting in the living room with you, and then if I was moving around the house, or if I was just in town. Same thing there. And it's not a criticism. It's so hard for me to explain how terrified their lives growing up must have been, just daily. I got to make sure that you're not too mad at me because you'll report me to, whoever, the bath party, and I could disappear. It's really hard to explain.
We didn't do this right when it came time to leave. We left millions of dollars of stuff behind. Did you think that was going to happen? That we would just leave it? I think it was rationalized that it costs so much to bring it back, it's better to just leave it.
Well, they do make that. I mean, that's historical, though. If you guys... if you're an aviation guy, you get your heart broke. Look at all we did when we left, in World War II. We were shoving airplanes off carrier decks, lined up a bunch of P-38s in the Philippines and bulldozed them because it is, the logistics guys get involved and said, well, it's going to cost you this much to bring it back and it's going to cost you this much to leave them. And you just,
I'm just thinking of that technology
Yeah.
in the wrong hands. Then we hear that they're shooting at us with our own stuff. We hear these reports.
I don't think we left anything that was really technologically advanced. You know, there's different levels of technology you share with your. If it was that good of stuff, we would have taken it home. A lot of Humvees, MRAPs, things like that. But those are, you know, there's nothing super technical about them. They're just up armored, and they're very well engineered. They're very well designed. But they're not, you know, transporters or anything with time traveling devices or anything like that. So they're amazing and they work, but they're not high tech stuff.
What was your reaction when the president announced that he's going to send another 1,500 troops this past week?
That's tough because you know, I'm a retired military officer, so I got to be real careful about this. It's one of those things. Here's the Banzet foreign policy. If you make me come over there, it's on like Donkey Kong, and we're not done until I say it's done. And that's the whole thing is I don't think there should have been much in the way of negotiating with Maliki. I have to explain winning to you then. It's not your call. We should go behind closed doors, and we should explain why I want 20,000, 25,000, whatever it is, troops here, to make sure that our presence is known. That's all it has to be, is presence. So when you leave this vacuum, something else fills it. And I think the worst way to fight a war is in dribs and drabs. You send a little bunch, you know, a few folks out, and then you send a few more folks and a few more folks. The best way to conduct war is overwhelming force. It saves everybody's lives. It does.
And we're not doing that.
Airstrikes, I'm an advocate of air power, but it's a combined, you know, in combined arms campaigns, air power is a critical component. There's a joke in World War II thing, you know, a Russian general and an American general met over the Rhine, and they start giving each other high fives or whatever and saying, hey, what a great war. And they said, oh, by the way, who won the air war? It's a necessary component of a combined arms campaign, but terrorism reacts to force, perceived or otherwise, right? How often does the biggest guy in the playground get picked on? It doesn't matter if he knows how to fight. If he's the biggest, most, you know, intimidating looking guy out there, he doesn't have to fight. So if ISIS thinks they're going to get their fannies handed to them, and I'll just give you this, Mark, do you think for a second, if there was a Iraqi wing of F-16s, of Vipers over there, right now with Iraqi pilots that were trained by U.S. pilots, if you had, you know, 30 F-16s and they knew how to employ them, they had all the weapons and all that kind of stuff, and American advisors were there, do you think ISIS would have stuck their ratty little faces over the border in the first place? I mean,
yeah.
Really? Why?
You write about the Brits. Mm-hmm. Tell them about the Brits and the significance and what it was like when they were leaving too.
Well, yeah, they love them. First of all, they were one of the things again that prompted me to write the book was it sure seemed like we were over there by ourselves, all unilaterally and stuff, right? We just surprised Iraq and went in there all by ourselves. But everywhere I went, I didn't know whose uniform this was. I was like, who are these guys? Well, that's the Aussies. Well, who are these guys? That's the Tongans. Is Tongan a thing? I didn't even know that. But they were over there. They are. They're huge. So I was constantly, who are these guys? Who are these guys? I worked directly for a Brit, a group captain, which is an 06 equivalent. And these guys were awesome. They have a really different way of looking at things. And the guys that we had, though, they were rotating out, I think, every 3 months, I think it was. So we went through a few of them while we were there. And there was one that wasn't as good as the others, but they were really, really good. It was just a different kind of perspective. They had a low tolerance for the kind of the palace intrigue that some of these other guys did. You know, I want to be in charge of this because I want to be in charge. I could sit in the big chair, all that kind of stuff. But they were right in there swinging with us. We had 2 guys work for me that were major lieutenant colonel equivalents, worked with me. And then they were just everywhere. They were all levels in NATO, in our CAFT, the Coalition Air Force Transition Team / Training Team. They were everywhere. It was completely a group effort. There were Aussies everywhere. It was really.
Were the Japanese there too?
Yeah.
Japanese sent people. And
they're Georgians, not from the state, but from the.
Yeah.
And that was weird because if you remember what happened there, the Ruskies got frisky. And somebody invaded Georgia. They probably had the same kind of mystery guest in Georgia. But remember, they had some issues there. So these poor Georgians who were out there, and they were guarding gates and doing all that kind of stuff, they were stuck. My home country's under attack, and I'm here in Iraq. Interesting.
But Turkey doesn't have a presence, is that correct?
I don't think so.
And I never understood that. They're right next door.
Well, they are, but I think they're very comfy sitting there.
Okay.
And again, the political aspects of it, there's tensions in the Turks and the Kurds and all that kind of stuff. Now, the northern part of Iraq was very, very peaceful. Erbil and Kirkuk, one of the reasons we picked Kirkuk was that the Kurds had that well in hand. And again, for for everybody who thinks that they just can't get along, the sectarian violence, we love saying that. And I think the vice president way back when said Iraq should be carved up into at least 3.
Right.
Yeah. Here's what happened to me. In the office that I worked in with the Iraqis, the Kurd was in charge. The head guy for the Air Force was a Kurd. The Sunni were married to Shia. I don't know if there was any Christians, but they sure didn't care that I was. As a matter of fact, well, he did that very, very stupid, awesome, heroic thing, that little goofball. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, but that's, again, it was
up to you.
They just didn't care. Yeah. They didn't care what sect. I mean, you can say, well, the Irish and the English have a little bit of tension there too, don't they? The Protestants and the Catholics. I mean, you can go throughout history and say that people can't get along. But when push came to shove, the guys that I was working with, and they were very educated, they were very professional, they didn't care. They cared if you were a good pilot or not. They cared if you were an honorable man or not. When they saw us, man or woman, it blew them away how well we worked with each other, because we didn't care. I mean, I don't care if you're black or white or a woman or whatever. I don't care. It's your performance. And the other thing that I did not know was that they had females in their Air Force throughout. I mean, since the 50s, I think they would talk about being trained by female instructor pilots. So they were completely westernized is not really the right word, but modern, I don't know. And then when Saddam took over, it kind of took a step backwards.
I don't want to give the whole thing away, but read the section with the woman who comes out who's having a problem with her pants. And nobody's going to say anything. Yeah, there you go. But you got to read it. It's in the book. You got to get the book to read it. You coached people, I mean, a lot. For example, I read where some of these Iraqi trainees come to the United States for a short time to train, and you caution them. Hey, I know you think you're going to Disneyland, but there are certain neighborhoods you don't go in. Remember? Yeah. What'd you tell them?
Well, it was kind of what I was trying to get across, and it was these three. It was 3 of the young guys, and then one old guy who, unfortunately, he was their chaperone. And boy, did he come back looking 10 times older than he was when he left. Because we had these, 3 23-year-old young men who had never been outside of Iraq. They got to go to San Diego for like 2 weeks, and he came back and he looked like he had put on some years. And this is the difference between our upbringings, right? If I said stay out of a neighborhood, you'd be like, well, it's kind of ratty or whatever, and I might, roll through some stop signs or whatever. These guys, when I said, well, there's some neighborhoods you're going to have to stay out of, and this big kid, just a sweet kid, he goes, because you'll get killed, right? And I'm like, no, you'll have to ask for directions. And for some guys, it's like the same thing, right? I would rather die than ask directions. But that was his frame of reference. If I go to the wrong neighborhood, I'm going to get killed. No, you're going to have to ask for directions. Now, there's some that you want to stay away from, but by and large, San Diego's a pretty nice place. Just it's easy to get turned around. That's all I was trying to say to him, and he's like, oh my God, we'll get killed. And he was okay with that. He was like, I'll just have to avoid that. I'm like, man, I would not send you someplace where it's that dangerous for you. That was a huge success, and this is why. And this was why the head of the Iraqi Air Force was such a visionary. It's really hard to lie about the United States when A, you can speak the language, and B, you've been here.
Yeah.
You can't call us the Great Satan if you've spent any length of time here, or you come here and you're planning to do that anyway. But if you come here with an open mind, remember what I said that old major said. He goes, when I said, now you have to take care of these kids. You're responsible for these little twerps running around and getting into trouble and stuff like that. And he looks at me because they had to raise bail. It'd be like if each one of us, and we tried to do the math one time, but it was pretty depressing. It would.
Well, that's right. They had to pay bail to assure they'd come back.
A bond is more important.
A bond. So if they left the country, they're going to come back to get their money. They were afraid they'd leave and not come back?
It happened quite a few times because, again, what's the incentive? You can get here. You can go to Canada. You can go wherever. You can stay here. you can do whatever.
So everybody follow this? The soldiers paid a bond to come for training to assure they'd come back.
And it was a huge amount.
Like 1,000?
No. It was in relative terms. Let's just pretend that they got paid $1,500 a month for the colonels and generals and stuff, but they would have to pay like $10,000. I mean, it was not. It was a year or so's worth of, and they'd have to pay that to the Ministry of Defense, and their families were then kept here too. They obviously couldn't leave either. And that's not a terrible thing. They did lose some folks, and then their families would kind of squirt out through Syria or something. But these guys all had to raise that kind of money, and the older gentleman, the major, had a tough time raising it because he had like 3 kids, and it was really tough. And the other part is, and I want to keep this undercurrent of distrust, is he couldn't really tell people what it was for. You know, some of it, because that gives away the fact that I'm working with the Americans. I'm an Iraqi Air Force pilot or whatever, and so he had to.
Does it make up an excuse?
They all had different methods of coping with that. Assad did tell his kids. He said, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing the same old thing. Dad's still working for the Air Force and all that kind of stuff. Others not only sent their families outside of Iraq into Syria or Jordan or one of those other places, but they also would make up stories. The significant other would probably know, but if you had little kids, you certainly didn't want them on the playground saying the wrong thing to the wrong person, and that generates a couple of phone calls, and next thing you know, somebody's waiting in your living room when you get home. So the major had to, he raised the bail, but it was like, hey, I just need it. Can you just give me, $10,000? Mark, can you just give me $10,000? I'm not going to tell you what it's for. So he takes him over there, and he looked at me and he said, it's a great honor to be chosen for this. And I said, well, you've earned it. You did all the stuff you're supposed to do, and we need somebody old to watch these young kids. And he says, I just think America's impossible. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, he didn't have enough words to explain what he meant. And when he came back, not only did he look like he had put on 10 years or whatever, but he looked at me, but there was a twinkle in his eye this time. And he says, I said, what'd you think? Because they were doing sensor training. So they were looking at mission sensor operators. They had C-12 or King Airs that had sensors in them. So we thought it'd be best if they got primary training on the systems that they bought. So he came back and he was all spun up about that. But I said, well, what'd you think of America? And it's just so funny to listen to somebody who's not been here or been in that kind of environment describe a Walmart. They had food and pajamas and TVs. And I'm like, yeah, that's Walmart. What? And it was unbelievable. And the food was good. The quality of the stuff was great. But he looked at me and he goes, Mike, I still think it's impossible. Because he couldn't make that leap. And that's why, again, talking to Kyle, I guess I said a lot of stuff in that car ride, didn't I?
That was quite a ride. It's a 2-minute ride.
It would have been great if we got lost and I had an excuse, but it's hard to shut me up about this. It's not hard to, there's just so much to say. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I wanted to say to you and to everyone, one of the reasons that we invited you to come here was because I think, having talked to you on radio a couple of times and having you here now, it proves it once again. This book, I think, exemplifies who you are as a person. You are a man who chooses to see the good in people rather than what is not good. You're not oblivious to it, but you choose to look at the positive and the opportunity. That's what came through in this book. That's what spoke to me about you.
I'm going to argue with you on that. Yeah, I'm a heck of a guy, but this is supposed to be about, it is about us. That was my whole point. Remember the pizza story?
Yeah.
That one's tough for me to talk about. And it's not nobody gets killed, nobody. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about
pizza.
The pizza.
Yeah.
Because the kid was so
This is the one that goes all over the place.
What?
No, that's the other one.
Yeah, this is the kid.
He gets you a present. That's the one for Christmas for your family.
No, that's why you really didn't read this at all, did you, Mark?
I did.
He is so full of it. He just put those in. No, this was just, and it's one of those things. It's just kind of a touchy thing. There was this young kid. It was one of those terrible dust storms, and everything was just red. It's just nasty dust. It's not even a good old sandstorm like you guys have. It's just this nasty stuff. Turns everything red. You can't see squat. And I'm walking, and that we had a little shopette that sold a bunch of crap, and then we had some other shops that sell more crap. But the best part was they had this little trailer that served up pizzas, and they had like 5 different kinds or whatever. But it was hot and it was gooey, and it was great. We really get taken care of, which I talk about in there all the time. And I was sitting there in line, and unfortunately there was this very straight lieutenant colonel who was sitting there in his flight suit and just looking down his nose at this. And he was an Air Force guy. It pains me to say. I should have made something up, huh? Forget that. He was a Navy guy. But he's looking down at this young man who's probably an Army, I don't know, E3 or something. But this guy, all of his buds were out they're prepping their MRAPs and their Humvees. And they're going to go outside the wire and patrol all night. And this kid has got, and it was just heartbreaking because his uniform was worn out, and he had. But he had scribbled down, the order for his whole squad, right? 2 of these and 6 of these and whatever it is. And he was having trouble getting it out. He could hardly read it because it was all wrinkled and ratty and stuff like this. And this pilot was like, come on, And then he found out, he put in his order, and then he found out that he didn't have the money. And oh my God, you would have thought that somebody had dropped a bomb on this colonel. And so he goes, I'll be right back. I'm sorry. And he goes running back there. It's just, and all these young kids are out there prepping their Humvees. They're doing things far more dangerous than I ever have. And so this pilot gets up there, and he's very good at ordering pizzas. Congratulations, you pulled it off. And so he does his thing, and everybody's very impressed with his pizza ordering skills. And I just get up there, and I wasn't. Oh, I hate people like that. Anyway, I get up there, and I just said, how much is that order? Because they were waiting to start, and I said, I'll pay for it. It's not a big deal. I'm not a hero because I paid $50 to get this kid his pizzas. Well, my plan was to get it all through and have them cooked, and then I would get my stuff and get the hell out of there, and he wouldn't know who did it. But he came back too quick, and it was just, again, I'm not denigrating. He was so earnest. He had all his money, and he had pulled all these young E2s and E3s, and there's probably a lieutenant sprinkled in there. And he got this big pile of ones and nickels and whatever else they had, and he was going to go pay for his pizzas, and they were all done and waiting for him. And he's like, whoa, what happened here? I was like, well, don't worry about it. We took care of it. And he was so appreciative, Mark. It broke my heart. That kid's going to take those stupid pizzas, and he's going to go back there, and he's going to share them with all his buddies, and they were so excited about it, and then they're going to get in those Humvees, and they're going to go outside the wire, and every place they go is a little bit safer because they're there. And it's kind of why I was so bent when the esteemed senator from Nevada got on TV and told us what a bunch of losers we were. I didn't appreciate that. Because the war is over, the surge has failed, that played in the chow hall. It played on all the networks and stuff like that. And here's what that did. Not only, and I'm sitting there with 300 or 400 Army and Navy, everybody's there eating chow, and it got a little quiet. Because that clip got played over and over and over. And it got pretty quiet because think about it. Now you go back outside the wire. Now, here's the unintended consequence of that. Is when I got back to work, the Iraqis that I'm trying to help, said, Mike, what's going on? Are you guys losing? Go back to that, how fragile that balance is.
Yeah.
If you're Joe Schmo civilian, and now you hear that we're losing and the bad guys are winning, how much help are you going to give me? And it made it more dangerous for them. And that's tough to forgive.
The Christmas thing got me because you still have those Christmas trees.
Dang right I do. That's the most precious Christmas gift.
This is a person who thought the world of you and put himself in danger. I mean, you even write, I would have killed him if I knew he was going to do this. He went outside and went all over the community looking for these, because he knew you were Christian, I guess, and wanted you to have something for your family, and he comes in with this thing. And once you realized what he did, you had to go from being horrified to being grateful.
I was worried to death because he wouldn't tell me what it was. I was like, oh my God, are you being... This was the guy that eventually got promoted to general, and Wahid. And he was an amazing man. He flew lots and lots of missions against Iran, was one of the guys that we depended on. He was one of the guys that got it. He was one of the guys that understood. And he had the horsepower to make change happen. I won't tell the dates. We'll talk about this one. He had been outside several times, and again, they were very reluctant to show that they were working with us in that fashion, right? But this guy, he was such a, and Assad was his friend. I mean, Assad was a little fat guy, and this guy wasn't fat, but he was a scruffy. He looked like he'd been mugged every time I saw him. He just is. his flight suit was always down about halfway, and he just was he's really a lifetime smoker, and you want cigarettes, boy, you should try some of those. That will cure you or kill you. And every time he'd laugh, he'd cough up a lung and blah, and he was awesome. And he never tied his boots. And he was one of the premier instructors in the Iraqi Air Force. And the reason he never tied his boots was because I asked him, I said, could you at least get dressed if we have to go somewhere? And he said, well, when he was an instructor, if the cadets weren't paying attention, he would flick a boot at them and get their attention. So he was exactly the right guy that we needed. And he went out when it was time for me to come home for Christmas. I was lucky enough, I got a mid-tour and I could come home for Christmas. And I just get this panicked phone call from him. And he says, Mike, are you still there? And I'm like, well, yeah, what's going on? You're not supposed to be calling me. You know, I don't want him on the phone speaking English. And the stuff he would say about the terrorists was just, well, we can't repeat it here, but he didn't think much of them. So he says, I must see you, I must see you. And I was worried sick, Mark, because I had already been through that with some of these other guys. And I'm like, Wahid, what is going on? He's like, I can't talk now, I'm going through the checkpoints. And you can't have your phone out. You know, a lot of stuff gets deaded with the phone. So you can't have your phone out, and you got to move very slow when you're going through the checkpoints. You all have to, you know, so it's very, very tough. And he finally, and I was just worried sick, and he called me once he got on the other side, and he's driving his personal vehicle. And I just wanted to punch him. As soon as I found out he was safe, it's like when your kids do something stupid, you're like, are you safe? Yes. Pow! What's wrong with you? You know, and I want to do that same thing, but he had this goofy grin on his face, and he got into his trunk, and he pulled out this gift for me. And it was a little Christmas tree. It was probably the cheapest Christmas tree in the world. It was a little Chinese bendy Christmas tree. It's about this tall. And he had the blinking lights to go with it. And he said, I said, what? Where'd you get this? He goes, I had to go all over Baghdad. I'm like, you are a moron. Stop. And think what he was doing. Hey, do you guys have a Christmas tree? It's for my Christian friend who's in the United States Air Force. Do you have anything like that? Oh, go next door. I'll do that. Let's go. I just wanted to spank him. And he gave that Christmas tree to me. And that's one of the most, he says, I said, you know what this means? Because I'm kind of a moron. And I said, you know what this means, right? And he goes, yes. He says, I know it's important to you. And so I got it. And it's as simple as that. It was as simple as that.
Before we go to questions from the audience, why did you quit?
Well, political. It was a political thing.
You were supposed to be promoted, right?
Yeah, I would have been a good squadron commander, I think. When the elections of 2008 happened, the way that happened, and the why that it happened, it didn't seem that was not the America that I knew, and it wasn't about really who got elected. It was about how. And I said, man, it seems like we're electing people either because of their race or because they've said that they will give you stuff that you haven't earned, and how they treated Sarah Palin, who I don't know that much about, really. I just don't. But man, you got to say a bunch of mean things about somebody. Now, it probably happened on the other side too, but I just saw this, and I said, I'm not going to put my little pink body in between anymore. Now, that was a 100% personal decision. I think my son wants to get in, and you know, Kyle and everybody else. The most precious thing that I ever did in my life professionally was serve in the United States military. And maybe that's why. I was like, I felt like the faith had been broken. And it really doesn't have anything to do with the guy that's in charge now or anybody else. It was just the how. And so I had to write a letter. I got a definitely promote to lieutenant colonel. And I had to write a letter saying, thanks, but no thanks. I think it's time for me to leave. And again, that is just my decision. Everybody else does. It's an honorable profession. You should do it. It'll make a grown-up out of you, and it will give you a profound appreciation for what this country stands for in a lot of other people's eyes. And that's why it's so tough to see how that. I'm sure, you know, I don't know if we have any Vietnam era folks in here, but it's probably very similar to in the 70s when we decided to leave South Vietnam. And after we said we'd stay, and then we left. And we know how that turned out. And so that breaks faith. You know what? If you're the strongest kid on the block, you have a certain response. Spider-Man was right? It's the guy that said, with great power comes great responsibility, or his Aunt B, or whoever that is, I don't know. Or was that Andy Griffith? Oh, whoever it is.
Probably Cooper.
Yeah. If you have great power, you have great responsibility, and I felt that. Again, that was just my decision.
And we all appreciate your service to our country. We're going to go to the audience now and questions. Alyssa on the left, Kyle on the right. We ask you if to keep your question, Kyle to the left, Alyssa to the right. We ask you to keep your questions brief, and then following that, Major Mike will be signing copies of his book, Our Partners, from the bookstore here at Embry-Riddle. Let's go to the audience. If you raise your hand, we'll come to you as quickly as possible. We'll try to get to the people on the end and go left to right. Anybody over here, wave over, and Alyssa will come to you. And I'll tell you, this young man who's not going to graduate until the spring has more than earned his stripes for going through the audience the way he does. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Recently, there's been a lot of reporting in the news about how ISIL's recruiting methods have been very effective in radicalizing young Iraqis who ordinarily, before ISIL came around, might not have been doing all sorts of crazy things. How resilient would you say the Iraqis that you train for the Air Force or security forces in Iraq, how resilient would you say are they to that sort of radicalization, so that people that we have trained do not end up working for ISIL or the Islamic State, whatever they're calling themselves now?
Right. So how firm is the resolve so they can resist it?
I think that there's a core that will, my friend Assad, he will be dead before he gives in to, and I think he is a Sunni. Again, he'll be dead before he lets ISIS take over Iraq. Remember what I said about trust, though. Terrorism works, again, I don't have to kill all of you. I have to kill a couple of you, and I have to keep most of you quiet, and I can radicalize a couple of you. And then, so there's not this vast swath. I think that there are some people who are, there was a story in here about the folks that were working for, they called themselves Al-Qaeda then. I don't really care what they called themselves. There was a story in here about when they started the offensive, the Iraqis started taking things upon themselves and working through Basra and some of these other towns. One of a little general, the one I accidentally kidnapped, he's the one that said, when they started doing this Basra offensive, a lot of the police, if you remember when that happened, we had a lot of poo-pooing about it in the press, but a lot of the police turned on them, and a lot of the folks that were in the Iraqi army turned on their comrades. And I went and I talked to this guy about it, and he was in charge of a significant chunk of the Iraqi military. And I asked him kind of that similar question. I'm like, what the heck, dude? And he says, well, that was a very good thing that they did that. And I'm like, I don't understand this at all. And he said, because now we know who the bad guys are. And again, if you have somebody who is prone to be radicalized, they're going to get radicalized. This gives them that opportunity. I will tell you, and I believe this 100%, I think there would be a lot less if we were standing there with them. Because again, it's that, I'm sure you value your life. If some of the people in this room were saying either you join us or you get killed, and some of the people in this room were saying I'll help defend against those people, you kind of do this calculation: who's going to stick around the longest? How safe am I going to be? And that's what they do. I think those people that are prone to that will look for an excuse to become radicalized. But I had Sunni friends, I have Shia friends, Kurds, and they'll be fighting to the last man.
Let's come right over here, and your question. Good evening. Thank you.
I had a son who went to Iraq 3 times with the Iowa Air Guard, F-16 pilot. Mm-hmm. And what I don't understand, we still have people in Germany and Japan from World War II. Would you give me a really candid opinion about this power vacuum we've left and what's happened since then? Yeah. And what can we anticipate from this guy with 2 more years that he has left in office?
I just don't know who you're talking about.
Thank you for being so direct, sir.
No, you notice I have a real problem with being forthright.
If you ever come out of your shell, you're really going to be something.
Yeah, no. That's kind of the argument that I use too. One of the things we talked about was, again, with Kyle, my God. I said, how long does it take? Does anybody know how long it takes us to grow a major or a good senior NCO? And everybody knows who's been associated with the military that the majors don't dictate policy. They don't do any of that kind of stuff. They execute the orders, right? They're not running things. And senior NCOs or mid-level NCOs, I was an E7 tech sergeant, they aren't running things. But it takes about a decade to get one of those, right? And so if we were started right at the beginning, Now we would have a bunch of, and let's pretend that all of our training went flawlessly and everybody picked up on it, so we'd have a pretty good cadre of majors and E6s, right? What we needed was presence, and I think that's, I don't understand. I think the people that made those decisions had good reasons to do that. But again, Banzet's foreign policy, I'll tell you when we're done. And that's probably, it's not active combat roles. That's the big thing. That's the point I'm trying to make in here, is it's not going out on combat patrols all the time. It's less and less of that. But the reason that police patrol, I think this is a decent analogy, is, you know, we've hired the same number of police, right? They can either sit in the station, but generally they're out in the neighborhoods. And the worse the neighborhoods, the more police presence is there. That's what, that because it inhibits bad behavior. If I can keep you from executing a bad behavior, a bad plan, that's a win for me. And then you can't influence the guy next to you and the guy next to you and the guy next to you. If I can just keep you from misbehaving, and we can do that with presence. So it broke my heart. I knew, at that point I was really happy that I changed their names. Because it's I don't know if you've realized the Middle East is not that stable of a place. But if you, can you imagine, again, let's go down memory lane or whatever, and we'll say that there's a strong and stable Iraq for realsies, and that we hadn't managed to let Egypt go. So if you have a strong Egypt and a strong Iraq, can you imagine what kind of would the Middle East be better off? Not our influence necessarily, but would the Middle East, would the people of the Middle East be better off? I can guarantee you that slaughter, I know 770 kids who would be better off.
Back in the audience, good evening. Thanks for being with us.
Hi. My question is about the Kurds. I haven't heard one bad word about the Kurds from any military people at all. And I've heard a lot of good things. So I'm wondering why, as a country, why shouldn't we back the Kurds and heavily arm them? They seem to be pretty respectful people.
I'll tell you what, there were Kurds, they were very well respected by the Iraqis themselves. They were known as kind of this warrior sect, almost. The head guy was a Kurd. I think the next guy was a Sunni or Shia or whatever. I think we depend on them a lot. Honestly, I don't know the operational, I think we have tried to drop some weapons and stuff to them. I think that gets into some pretty good political science theater stuff. The Turks are very aware of the Kurds. They have not had a good history. So I think there's maybe a balancing act there. But again, I hate to identify a particular sect because I know they can work together. It's no different than Baptists and Protestants. You just got to figure out, you know, who's bringing the lime jello with those nuts and stuff into the picnics, you know, which is gross. Why would you do that? So I think we probably are depending on the Kurds. As a matter of fact, there was a big dam, right, that the ISIS had taken, and then weirdly enough, right after we started putting in advisors in, a joint op between the American advisors and the Kurds and our air power, all of a sudden we have the dam back. So you're 100% right. I don't know why we're not doing more. Right, I don't know. I'd like to give them all. I'd like to keep them as unified as is possible. I would hate to see a splinter, you have Kurdistan or something. That's just my personal opinion.
Before we go back to the audience, you're a military guy. Let me ask you, do you think we'll ever get the straight story and get justice for Benghazi?
Well, you don't have to be a military guy to come up with the answer.
No,
to
but
that.
I figure maybe you give me some meat here,
No,
because we don't get any meat from the State Department.
I'm not plugged into any of that stuff.
Yeah, but I
if
want
was,
your
I could
opinion
tell-
on it.
My opinion is that it will take a different administration. I mean, you find all the dirt of a prior administration when another administration rolls in. I think that's one of those things that I think I'm pretty comfortable I know what happened.
Yeah.
I don't need anybody to tell me that.
Yeah.
It's again, it's kind of what role the media plays in informing. One of the things that I said was I don't think that you can do a lot with just omission of a word or two, right? You can do a lot with omitting coverage. You know, I like to say, you know, the Bible has that commandment, thou shalt steal, remember that? Or is it thou shalt not steal? I keep getting those two confused.
Thou shalt not steal.
Really, so it's different, isn't it? If I omit one little word, thou shalt steal or thou shalt not steal. So if you give coverage and you omit critical facts or a side of the story, I mean, how many of you have heard about Abu Ghraib?
Abu Ghraib,
Abu
yes.
Ghraib, whatever you call it. Yeah.
Right.
A very well-informed audience. How many of you heard when the first Iraqi pilot training class took off? Nobody really. I find that entirely predictable. Because that was a big deal. That was a big deal. We had these four young men. I got to think about the names that I gave them in here. It was Mustafa, and Ahmed, and they called them the four M's. And I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. It's very close, So, but these kids learned, and I know I'm getting off track, but these kids learned English again while being mortared and rocketed. They went through all of our systems. They came out as a lieutenant that he's going to be. I would serve with them in a heartbeat, and nobody cared. They took off. It was the first time they had touched an airplane. And I heard, I think he was Major General at that time, Brooks Bash. He stole my line, by the way, because I had this great picture of him looking into, I think I have that picture in the book, this young kid looking into the airplane, and he had never touched an airplane. These were highly educated people, engineers, and General Bash was looking for a line. I said, the kid is looking into his future. And he goes, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because I get that kind of feedback a lot. And, but then I heard him on the radio say that. I'm like, he stole my line.
Back in the audience, your question. Good evening. We're handing the mic. We're playing past the microphone.
We have two sons. Both are graduates from Riddle. One's in the Air National Guard. He's been Iraq 7 times and Afghanistan once. Reconnaissance, and he says he can't tell us what he's doing. Okay, I'll accept that.
Reconnaissance.
Now that brings up the media that we have here. It seems like we have the right side. There's one station on the right, and all the others are on the left. Who do you believe besides the British BBC?
Honestly,
he's kidding, but he's also serious because it's true. You hear stuff on the BBC you never hear in this country.
I'll tell you what, I was just complaining about the coverage of the Iraqi Air Force, those 4 cadets. There was one organization that did cover it, CNN International. Now, we should have been. Anyway, I don't trust anybody, really. I trust but verify, everybody. Of course, I trust Mark. He speaks God's truth all the time. But tell more about my book, Mark. You sit there and you go, okay, if you pull them all, you probably get what's in the thing that I don't like, the thing that bothers me the most is the omission, that you don't know you haven't been told. I mean, that's really what prompted me to sit down and write this book. It wasn't, you can predict that Fox News or some of those will have kind of center or center-right stuff. You predict everybody else is center or center-left or way, way left. And then there's MSNBC way over there. But I can't believe, I listened to Rush Limbaugh. I discovered him, I don't listen to him much anymore, but I discovered him one night and he gave me just one piece of advice. Not me, but everybody who was watching TV that day. And I was a staff sergeant. I was sitting in Las Vegas, and I was watching this chubby little guy gets on, and he starts waving his arms around talking about something. And there was one thing that stuck, and it was the realization, and I couldn't believe I was this stupid, but the realization that he had to tell me that the people that are writing articles and performing on TV and stuff like that are humans, and they have their own agendas. And again, you feel stupid having to say that, but I just thought news was news. Walter Cronkite, tell me what I'm supposed to think. Right? Mom and Dad there was 3 people that told him what to think not to think, but told him what the truth was. That was the biggest gift he ever did for me was, I don't think that way anymore. I know that people have biases, and as hard as they try, they can't get rid of them all. So even if we have the purest of intentions, and I'm guilty of it too, this is my opinion. It's what I saw, and it was from an admittedly pretty small group, and a lot of folks that I've talked to, the guys that were in the field, the infantrymen and stuff like that, probably didn't have the same experience that I did because they were doing the hard stuff. They were enabling all the stuff that I got to do.
Both Rush and Hannity.
None of the above.
Rush and Hannity have your book. I can't believe they haven't had you on yet.
Well, that is a failing on their part.
Yeah. The audience now, who's got a question for Mike Banzet? Way back there. Thank you.
She got way up there, didn't she?
Hello. Thank you so much for your service, sir. I believe that the Iraq War was just and right. And you mentioned you were a Christian, and we've seen a lot of persecution of Christians over in Iraq now. What do you believe is the answer to stopping that persecution of Christians?
I know I sound like a one-trick pony up here. You tell me, what do you think I think it is? If we were still sitting there, because they didn't care. For me, you're going to have radicals anywhere. You can find reasons to hate somebody in every neighborhood in this country. right? And Egypt was the same way, and they have their same issues. American presence changes people. It gives the good people the opportunity to bloom, right? You give them breathing room. It gives good. It's the same reason that the police, when they run through your neighborhoods, you're not changing the people that are there. You're not taking this one out and putting this one in. You're changing their patterns of behavior. And if you can get the patterns of behavior to become the constant, I'm telling you, the guy risked his life for a Christmas tree, a cheap Christmas tree for me. And while nobody seemed to have a problem with me being a Christian. I didn't what is that called? Speak a lot about it. Sorry about that, Embry-Riddle. My thesaurus failed.
Evangelize?
I didn't do that. Yeah, because that wasn't my job. But there was no doubt about it. And I saw Iraqi women run around, and some of them had crosses dangling. They weren't in burqas. If you want to see what a disaster the last 40 or 50 years have been for both Iran and Iraq and a lot of those places, take a look at Google is your friend and go look in the 70s. They looked just as stupid as we did in the 70s. Big giant mustaches, and these guys would talk about dancing along the rivers and the flowers, and they acted like just as big a goofballs as you or I would during the 70s. I wasn't there. How was that, Mark?
I got to ask you. You're one of those guys, like every military guy, you go where they send you. But
yeah.
Could you imagine being told, I don't know how this is going to go over, but can you imagine being told, oh, by the way, instead of fighting these bad guys, you're going to go to this country where they got Ebola, and you could come back with it, but see it. I mean, I don't see American fighting personnel having signed up for that. I know you don't get to pick your assignment, but this is a tough one. This
Right.
disease takes people out.
It does. That is why I quit. If you're going to say that you are going to pick and choose, then you probably shouldn't be in the military. Because you do. You go, I think that's a terrible idea, sir. I know it is. You're going to do it anyway. Away you go. Did we talk about that too? Wow.
What an education he got
No
in a
kidding.
2-minute ride.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, where are we with questions here? Way back here. Thank you, sir. We're fighting the clock, so if you can keep it brief.
You had a pretty good relationship with the Iraqi officers, and sometime during your tenure there, when you were at the O Club, did you have any conversation with them about weapons of mass destruction? And did they believe that there were such weapons in Iraq?
That's an interesting question. I'll go quick. First of all, boy, I wish there would have been an O Club. But we were under General Order 1, no booze. So that takes the fun out of things right there. Who's going to have a war and you can't drink to it? Here's what I think in there. This is what I wrote. Because of this, if I ask you how my nuclear weapons, I'm Saddam Hussein. You can't recognize me without my stash, but I'm Saddam Hussein. I'm going to ask you, who is in charge of my nuclear weapons research facility, hey, how's it going out there? What are you going to tell me? It is fabulous. We're on track. I'm going on vacation to Syria. I'll be right back. I think that you couldn't get them to admit failure. That was a big thing for us. They couldn't understand. We're like, you know what? If we miss it this time, we'll do it again. There's a huge thing about just getting them to take a test, the cadets, because they didn't want to fail. And as Embry-Riddle can attest, I don't have a problem with that at all. I think if you're spying on me and I'm Saddam Hussein and I keep asking you, hey, how's this thing going, WMD? And again, let's be clear, they're talking about, most people when they say the WMD stuff, they're talking about nuclear weapons development, because everybody should know by now that it was in the news. I mean, they found gas and artillery shells and things like that. So, and it was old, but they didn't find the kind of nuclear advanced technology that we kind of expected to find. Of course, if you give somebody a 2-year head start to hide all their stuff, that might be expected. But I'm going to come search your house in 2 years. You better not have any pot or anything in there. Okay. I think that culture lends itself to no failure, because you really could get shot. You would get shot. They had to walk a fine line. You couldn't be too stupid or you'd get shot. And you couldn't be too smart or you'd get shot. Anything that posed a threat to Saddam, you got shot. There was just like one answer in his Rolodex of answers, and it was shoot somebody. So when he would go, and even, again, if we're eavesdropping on somebody and everything that they say lends credibility to the fact that they do have a weapons program, that's the best thing I could come up with, because I just saw it over and over. They would do everything to be in charge, have zero responsibility. Now, I want to be in charge of all the Air Force. Well, one of your Air Force guys is bad. He's not my guy. So that's the only thing I can think of.
Tell me if this happened. A couple of
Yes.
weeks ago when it started leaking out that maybe the president talked with chief leaders from Iran, or they contacted us and said, hey, we'll help you with this ISIS thing. Tell me if this happened. You read it in the paper and you went, hell no. Did you react that way?
I asked Wahid what the big deal is with the Iranians one time. I said, why is this bad? And they're Persians. They're not Arabs. They're very clear about that. I said, what is the big deal? Why can't you guys just get along, right? What is so painfully different from? And he mentioned the fact, he goes, no, they are Persians. They're not Arabs. But and it sounded like the line from Batman, right? He goes, they just want to watch Iraq burn. So if you ask somebody like that for help, maybe they can help. Maybe they will have a change of heart. Let's be optimists, shall we, Mark? Let's say all that stuff for the
I'm
last
not feeling
100
that
years,
good, no.
forget that.
Not after watching the
don't know.
Israeli prime minister on television the other day. I don't think so.
You have to hope that the senior leaders of this country and other countries would like to do what's in the best interest of not only the Middle East, but that tangentially will benefit us, right?
The operative word is hope.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
We got time for a couple more. Anywhere else in the audience here? I know I missed some people. Way in the back, where it usually happens. The big question of the night. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. The Iraqi people voted in very high percentage compared to the United States. What is their secret to their success, and do we need to lose the country before we have that kind of voting to rebuild it?
Answer, no television advertising. Go ahead, sir.
I don't know. That, again, speaks to their bravery. You have these people showing up with the purple finger, and you're right, we can't get off the couch and quit playing Xbox.
They value it more than we do because they haven't had it.
They gave it a shot, didn't they? And ISIS isn't going to be friendly to the democracy at all. And again, the kind of courage that they exhibited over and over and over humbled me. It did. We like to think of ourselves as, Captain Badass. Can we say that on TV? Sure. Yeah,
You got it done.
Yep. Bleep that out if you have to or not.
Go back and edit.
Yeah, so but we have grown. I grew up in high trust society. I had all the advantages. I live here. I'm fed well. I'm not worried about my well-being as a function of the state coming to get me to do anything. But those guys didn't. And when you talk about a 40 or 50-year-old person taking that leap of faith, that's humbling. Makes you feel about that big. Or write a book of 350 pages. So I wish we could get people involved. But they have to be well-informed people. I don't think mass voting is the right answer to a well-functioning government. I think an informed voter is a much better solution than just everybody voting.
We've had a couple of people come here who served in Iraq as well, and one or two of them told us that there were certain times they could call home. Were you able to call home?
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
And how did they do that?
We take care of satellite transmission.
But you had to be really careful, and it had to be only certain times, correct?
Well, there were in the morale centers. They usually had satellite phones and stuff, but you'd have to get in a line because you weren't the only one that wanted to call home. We had some other sat phone capability, depending on whether you're an operational unit or not, and if you could, they'd let you call home at certain times. And now, criminy sakes, we had internet cafes. I actually grounded my daughter over Skype in a mortar attack. Bam!
Wow.
How about that? I don't think it stuck, but still.
What a story.
You're grounded, gotta go. But Skype and all those kinds of things and they're so connected now, which can be good or bad. Again, if the mortar landed not way over there, but on me, that probably could have been bad. But we were very connected. The military does a great job of taking care of us.
What do you think that was like, huh? Hey, Mom, I just got grounded. Dad's getting shelled. See ya. The audience, anywhere before we wrap up, got a chance for one more question way in the back. I think it's one of our students that's here. And by the way, I want to thank the cadets and students and soldiers who all decided to come tonight. We appreciate your time. Good evening.
All right, so with ISIS wanting to develop the caliphate like the extremist Muslims have been wanting to do for, since they've been developed through Britain and England.
Yeah, that's not recent history, is it?
So we might not recognize them as a country because, we drew the country lines 50 years ago after World War I. That doesn't stand anything except for the Western world. For them, if they develop the caliphate, they don't care what we see them as.
Correct.
If they're a force to be reckoned with, they have backing from Russia and China. What do you think the military is going to be looking towards in the future as like a force to be reckoned with, because we can't just see them as a terrorist group forever, because they see themselves as the country. They have the money, they have the funds, they have the allies to back them up. Do you think eventually the military is going to have to recognize them, regardless of what the Western world calls them?
Well, you always have to recognize your targets, don't you? And do you think for 1 second that at any point, until they are stopped with military force, that they would say, oh, that's enough for us? Is there any time that they'll say, well, we'll just go to the Tigris, and that's enough of a caliphate for us? And they're not as, I don't think it's as unified as it comes across. I'm not going to ever scoff. We had the super genius Ben Affleck was on Mar or something, right?
Bill Maher.
And he said something about they don't even fill a stadium. Well, how many guys flew just 3 airplanes into various structures in the United States and caused quite a ruckus? I think the sooner we realize what a threat they are, the better. They can call themselves a state. They can call themselves whatever they want. The point is they are going to expand until they're stopped. And I don't think there's any literature. I mean, one of the good things I had over there, I read a lot of history while I was over there, the history of the Arab peoples and a lot of stuff on Islam and things like that. There's no reason for them to stop. They really think that they are doing, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They think they are doing what they're supposed to do. And when there's a power vacuum to restrain that kind of activity, they're going to use it. They don't have air power. I mean, somebody asked me the other day that they got some L-39s, and they're making a big show of, I'm flying these old jet trainers. I don't think that's, you talked about what do I believe? I don't believe that's happening, because I think as soon as anybody breaks ground, especially when we've got stuff orbiting, they're going to come down in chunks. So I think that the sooner that we recognize the threat, I don't know if you want to call it recognizing you're a state or what, but I recognize you're a bona fide threat. I don't care about the numbers. Again, if they get a weapon of mass destruction, nobody's going to care whether they've got 5,000 people, 2,000 people, or 20,000 people. It's the amount of damage they can do. And the thing about terrorism is, I don't have to convince all of you. I just have to kill a couple of the troublemakers and convince most of you to stay put. So sooner the better.
In a moment, Mike will be signing copies of his book. Our partners from the bookstore are doing that right now. So I'm going to ask you, once it stops, just give Mike a chance to get over there. He'll be glad to say hello to all of you. And if you could just line up right to the right, that will work out perfectly. And don't forget to give your name. Both Kyle and Alyssa will have clipboards. You're going to need your name, address, mailing address, and email and phone number for tickets to Crowdhammer on January 20th. I want to thank both Kyle and Alyssa for working, and congratulate Alyssa. She'll be graduating and walking with graduates in a few weeks. And Kyle graduates in the spring, and both of them have been wonderful additions to this program. I thank Bob Score for video tonight, to Tony and Richard up in control for doing the masterful job that they've done to light and audio record this program tonight back at our station. Sean Warab, executive producer for the Marc Bernier program, ran all of it. So let us tell you about our next event coming up. When we come back after the holidays, our first in a series of stars, Dr. Charles Krauthammer. This is a ticketed event, which is why you're going to be signing up. There'll be no live broadcast of this. It will be videoed, but you'll have a chance we'll take some questions for Dr. Krauthammer. He'll sign some copies of his book, and we're going to cover everything from post-election to pre-2016, to foreign policy, to the economy, to health care, all with Dr. Charles Krauthammer, renowned Pulitzer Prize winning author. That's coming up on January 20th. Once again, a big warm thanks from the Embry-Riddle crowd for Dr. and Major Mike Banzet. Happy holidays to everyone on behalf of Dr. John Johnson. Thank you and have a very pleasant good evening.